Right now, you're holding a phone that gives you instant access to Netflix, Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, and endless entertainment. Yet there are still moments when your mind quietly whispers, "What now?" That feeling is called boredom, and most people treat it like something is wrong with them, as if being bored is a personal flaw instead of a perfectly natural state. But almost nobody stops to ask a much deeper question. What happened when people experienced boredom 100,000 years ago? Not during the Roman Empire, not in ancient Egypt, long before that. Back when there were no books, no paintings, no music, and not even language in the form we understand today. Just human beings sitting together with nothing demanding their attention. The answer completely changes the way you'll think about your own brain. For decades, scientists believed our earliest ancestors were simply too busy surviving to ever experience boredom. Every waking hour was supposedly spent hunting, gathering food, searching for shelter, or staying alive, leaving no room for idle moments. That long-standing belief turned out to be completely wrong. In 1966, anthropologist Marshall Salins published research that challenged this assumption from the ground up. He spent years living alongside the Jew/Huansi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the few remaining groups whose lifestyle closely resembles that of our ancient ancestors. What he discovered surprised almost everyone. On average, they worked only about 15 to 20 hours each week. Not every day, every week. The rest of their time was spent relaxing, talking, sitting together, or simply doing nothing in particular. Salins famously described them as the original affluent society, not because they owned more possessions, but because they possessed something far more valuable. They had time. In fact, they often enjoyed more free time than the average person does today. So the real question isn't whether ancient humans ever became bored. The real mystery is what they chose to do once boredom arrived. The very first thing ancient humans did when boredom settled in was play. That might sound ordinary today, but its impact on human history was anything but ordinary. In 2010, archaeologist Francesco Derico and his research team carefully examined a collection of shells discovered inside South Africa's famous Blombos cave. These shells were approximately 75,000 years old. Each one had been carefully pierced with small holes and stained with red ochre. They weren't tools. They weren't weapons. They weren't leftovers from a meal. They were necklaces. At some point, 75,000 years ago, someone chose to spend precious time creating jewelry instead of simply surviving. Today, those beads are recognized as some of the oldest known examples of symbolic art ever created by human hands, and it all may have started with a simple moment of boredom. What makes this even more remarkable is the amount of time it must have taken. Drilling a tiny hole through a shell using nothing but stone tools required incredible patience. There was no metal, no electricity, no modern equipment, just determination, time, and steady hands. It probably consumed hours, perhaps even several days, yet they kept working anyway, because the alternative was simply sitting in silence, staring at the walls of a cave. Maybe necessity helped humans survive, but boredom may have inspired them to create. The very same pattern appears again when we look at the origins of music. In 2008, archaeologists excavating a cave in southern Germany uncovered an extraordinary discovery. They found a flute carved from the wing bone of a vulture. It featured 5 carefully crafted finger holes. The instrument was around 40,000 years old, long before farming existed. long before cities were built, long before civilization looked anything like the world we know today. Someone picked up the bone of a bird and decided to transform it into music, not because survival demanded it, but because they had free time, curiosity, and an imagination that refused to stay quiet. Neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, who has spent years studying the origins of music, argues that musical ability may actually be older than spoken language itself. According to his research, the human brain evolved to recognize rhythm and melody long before it developed the ability to build complex sentences. That happened because recognizing patterns was essential for survival, and music grew naturally from that remarkable ability. But boredom didn't just inspire art and music. It sparked something even more extraordinary. It gave birth to imagination itself. Think about what boredom actually requires. You can't truly feel bored unless you understand that time is passing. To experience boredom, your mind has to recognize that the present moment feels longer than expected. It also has to imagine that something different could be happening instead. In other words, boredom only exists when the brain can picture a future that doesn't exist yet. In a very real sense, boredom may have been the first sign that humans developed the ability to imagine possibilities beyond the present. Animals don't experience boredom the way we do. A dog waiting by the front door isn't bored. It's simply waiting. It doesn't sit there wondering what other opportunities it might be missing. Now picture an early human sitting beside a campfire 100,000 years ago with nothing urgent demanding attention. Eventually, the mind begins to wander. What if tomorrow's hunt fails? What's hiding beyond those distant mountains? What happens after we die? Questions like these changed everything. Every religion that has ever existed began with someone asking questions. Every branch of philosophy started the same way. Science itself continues searching for answers to many of those very same mysteries, and all of them may have started with one simple thing. Someone had nothing to do, so their thoughts drifted somewhere completely new. Modern research continues to support this connection. In 2013, psychologist Sandy Mann published a study showing that boredom can dramatically increase creative thinking. She asked participants to complete one of the dullest activities imaginable. Their assignment was simply copying numbers from a telephone directory. Immediately afterward, she measured how creatively they solved new problems. The participants who had been the most bored consistently produced the most original ideas. The explanation was surprisingly simple. When the outside world stops providing stimulation, the brain begins creating its own. And when the human mind is finally left alone with itself, it's capable of remarkable things. There was one more thing our ancestors consistently did whenever boredom settled in, and it may have shaped humanity more than anything else. They talked. Not about hunting, not about gathering food, not about survival strategies. They told stories. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, the researcher behind the famous theory that humans can naturally maintain social relationships with around 150 people, spent years studying what people actually discuss when they aren't focused on practical matters. His conclusion was surprising. Roughly 65% of everyday human conversation is social gossip. Who did what? Who said what? What happened to someone everyone knows? At first glance, it sounds completely pointless, but it wasn't. Dunbar argues that language didn't evolve primarily to organize hunts or coordinate daily tasks. Its greatest purpose was building stronger social bonds. Long before language existed, our primate ancestors strengthened relationships by grooming one another. That worked well enough, but grooming is slow. You can only do it with one individual at a time. Language changed everything. Now one person could connect with several people at once, then with 10, eventually with an entire group gathered around a fire. People could tell stories about someone who wasn't even there. They could build trust with individuals they had never physically interacted with. In many ways, civilization wasn't born because humans suddenly became better hunters. It emerged because people had free moments, sat together, and simply started talking. Boredom encouraged conversation. Conversation strengthened communities, and communities became the foundation of civilization. Think about the pattern. 75,000 years ago, someone with spare time crafted a necklace. 40,000 years ago, someone else carved a flute from the bone of a bird. Somewhere in between, groups of people sitting around campfires began asking questions no one could answer. What happens after death? Why do the stars move across the sky? Why does the world exist at all? Some of those questions eventually became religion. Others became philosophy. Many evolved into science, and some of those same questions still live inside you today. You wake up in the middle of the night with your phone resting on your chest, staring into the darkness, wondering about things that don't have simple answers. Modern psychology even has a name for what happens when boredom disappears completely. It's called cognitive overload. When every second of your life is filled with stimulation, your brain never gets the quiet moments it was designed to use. Those silent moments are when the mind processes experiences. It's when memories become stronger. It's when original ideas begin to form. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network. This network becomes active only when your mind isn't focused on an external task. It's also deeply connected to creativity, self-reflection, and empathy. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans learned how to transform silence into meaning. Then we invented smartphones. Since then, we've filled nearly every empty moment with another screen, another notification, or another distraction. But every time you put your phone down and allow yourself to simply sit with your thoughts, you're doing exactly what those ancient humans once did. You're following the same path that led someone to create the first necklace, the same path that inspired another person to carve the first flute, the same path that pushed someone to look up at the stars and ask why they were there. Boredom didn't hold humanity back. It helped make us human. And if you allow it, it may still unlock something remarkable inside you today.